Ya la la, ya la 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 la. Nachamu, nachamu. Ani Yoma Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu. Ami Yoma Elohechem. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, nachamu. Ami Yoma Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu. Ami Yoma Elohechem. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, nachamu. Ami Yoma Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu. Ami Yoma Elohechem.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome all here to Central Synagogue. Welcome to those of us who are here in person. We want to welcome those who are joining us on Zoom in this Mishkan service, and those who are watching in our wider live stream community on Facebook or YouTube or JBS. I think that's almost
Yes.
everything. Yes?
That's it.
The list has
Got
gotten longer. It's gotten harder to welcome
It's
everyone,
expanding.
but it's nice to welcome everyone.
Right.
It's great to be here in the Mishkan service, in this smaller, more contemplative service that we have on Shabbat mornings. So we were sort of kibitzing, and I think we could have probably kept kibitzing the whole morning. But we've started. We're in our worship now, and there's some things we need, or at least might be helpful to us on this journey together. One is our order of service, which we want to make sure everyone's picked up. And if you're joining us electronically, you can download a PDF of this wonderful document that'll have the order of the prayers that we're going to be doing, and also some supplemental music on the other side. Want to make sure we have a siddur, a prayer book in front of us, and again, it's available on our website if you are joining us electronically. And a little bit later this morning, we'll have an opportunity to study some text together. If you're here in person, you should have seen the text sheet as you came in. You can put that to the side. It's a distraction, and you won't need it for this first section of our service. There's no need to read ahead, and there's no pop quiz coming. So really and truly, you can just have the siddur in front of you. And again, if you're joining us electronically, that's available to you, and I hope you'll join along. We are here on, as you could maybe tell from our opening song, Shabbat Nachamu. And if you joined us last night for worship, for Kabbalat Shabbat, we had a preview from Rabbi Rosenthal, a really beautiful preview about the big themes that are taking place in the course of Jewish time as we walk through it. As we walked through the messages of rebuke that we received in our Haftarah, and then as we walked through Tisha B'Av together, and that moment of communal destruction. And here we are now in these weeks of consolation, where we have messages also from the prophetic books bringing us words of comfort, having heard those words of rebuke. And this is the first of those weeks, Shabbat Nachamu. And so we'll talk a little bit more about these texts and some of the themes that resonate as we walk through these Jewish time. But these weeks will culminate in Rosh Hashanah. And so for the next 7 weeks, we'll be walking through these messages of consolation and comfort. And so this week is very much the beginning of another cycle of Jewish time. And it's really wonderful to be entering into it together. I'm Rabbi Ari Lorge. I know I don't know everyone, but I know many of you, and it's great to see some familiar faces. It's great to see new faces. This is our cantorial intern, Jenna McMillan, and we are going to continue with this section of our service that's meant to really get us prepared and ready for Shema Ubirchotecha, for the Shema and the blessings around the Shema. The ancient sages gave us this opportunity to warm up. I've been up since 5 o'clock, but maybe not everyone has. And we need the opportunity to really awaken our souls to gratitude, to praise, to get into the right mindset in our heads, but maybe also to wake up our bodies a little bit too, so that we can really be present and really focus on this worship. So think of this as warm up as we start to really warm and prepare our souls up for the prayers that are to come. But we're going to continue on page 74 with Ma Tovu.
Page 78, Elohai. Mishamira, Mishamira, Ve'ata, Ve'ata, Mishamra, Ve'ata, Ve'ata, Mishamira, Mishamira, Mishamra, Bekirbi.
That was a newer melody to me. Was that one from Shani Ben Or?
No,
No.
this is
Whose was
Ross
that?
Perry.
Ross Perry.
Ross Perry. We've done it a couple times on Zoom, but never in person. So it's really awesome to get that call.
That call and response is
finally.
much nicer in person.
Much nicer. And we continue now chanting responsively on page 80. Our daily miracles, Nisim B'chol Yom. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who made me in the image of God.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Yisrael with strength.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen. As we continue in that mindset of daily miracles, we declare our dedication and our happiness to God with Ashrei, and we sing responsively on page 97. Ashrei, Ashrei, Yoshvei, Veitecha, Od Yehalelucha, Od Yehalelucha, Ashrei, Yoshvei, Veitecha. to worship the Baruch Hu, page 108. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. You may be seated. We continue on page 110 with Yotzer Or. Now, I don't know who knows this melody or not. I don't know if Shani introduced it to you. This is her melody along with Boaz Dorot. It's beautiful. So we're going to do a bit of call and response until we get the hang of it. But let's try it together. Baruch atah Adonai. Let's try that. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam. Eloheinu melech haolam. Yotzer or uvorei choshech. Yotzer or uvorei choshech. Oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. From the beginning. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam. Yotzer or uvorei choshech. Oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam. Yotzer or uvorei choshech. Oseh shalom uvorei et hakol.
On a week where we are commanded to speak words of comfort, let's read together at the top of 111. In the beginning, even then, a new light was sown for righteous, a promise that your light would become the catalyst first for order and then for hope. Author of language and light, help us to use words as you have, to cast light into dark waters and draw out justice and truth.
Or chadash al Zion ta'ir, v'nizkech kulanu mehera leoro. Or chadash al Zion ta'ir, v'nizkech kulanu mehera We thank God now for loving us deeply and for always showing compassion. On page 112. Ahavtanu Adonai Eloheinu Chemla Gedola V'teira Chamot Aleinu Ahava Rabba Ahavtanu Adonai Eloheinu Chemla Gedola V'teira Chamot Aleinu Ba'avor Avoteinu Telamtim chokei chayim Kein techonenu Utelamtenu Kein techonenu Utelamtenu Ahava Rabba Ahavtanu Adonai Eloheinu Chemla Gedola V'teira Chamot Aleinu Chemla Gedola V'teira V'kerev tanu l'shimcha hagadol Selah be'emet Lehodot lecha u'yachedcha be'ahava Baruch atah Adonai Habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Page 116. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadivarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha Veshinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha v'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot bein einecha uchtavtam amezuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tiskeru vasitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
With all of this talk of the Haftarah that we'll be speaking about and have been speaking about, we should also note all of you chanted a little bit of Torah this morning. The sections that we just chanted are actually in this week's Torah portion. And so, it's a good one to volunteer for if you're ever asked to read some Torah during the course of the year. This is not a bad one. You maybe been practicing quite a bit without knowing it. But we're going to focus a little bit more on the Haftarah than the Torah for this day, even though you have some declarations like Shema and Ve'ahavta still. But let's continue now with 122, Micha Mocha, our song of redemption.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים, לשמך שפתיים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. יאללה יאללה לה 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 לה, יאללה לה 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 לה, יאללה לה 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 לה, יאללה לה 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 לה. נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל, ופדי חינומך, יהודה וישראל. גואלנו, אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל. לה 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 לה, לה 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 לה, לה 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 לה, לה 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 לה. שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך, אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. יאללה לה לה לה, יאללה לה 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 לה, יאללה לה לה לה, יאללה לה לה לה. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, v'Konei Hakol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. La 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, כך כתוב יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ ברוך כבוד אדוני אבינו ומלכנו ומושיענו והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור.
We'll continue now through our service silently. The Amidah continues through page 142. You can also take this time to offer up the prayers of your heart, and you can remain standing or be seated.
Ose shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru tevel ve'imru amen. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Oh, say shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru amen. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Oh, say shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru amen. Hear, O Israel, Adonai, our God is one. Hear, O Israel, Adonai, our God is one. Let's rise. Hear, O Israel, Adonai, our God is one. Hear, O Israel, hear, O Israel, Adonai, our God is one. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo, Gadol Adonai iti, uneramema Shemo yachtav. Hallelu, 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 hallelu. Hallelu, hallelu, hallelu. Hallelu, hallelu, hallelu. Kol hanshabat hallelujah. Hallelu, hallelujah. Kol hanshabat hallelujah. Hallelu, hallelujah. Hallelu, hallelu, hallelu. Hallelu, hallelu, hallelu. Hallelu, hallelu, hallelu. Hallelu, hallelu, hallelu.
You can certainly be seated. We are reading from the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, continuing through this last book of Torah. In addition to finding the words of Shema, Ve'ahavta, even a repetition of the Ten Commandments, and this week these themes of this book are on display in the selection that we'll be reading from this morning. Themes of loyalty, steadfastness, a sense of the covenant, the brit that we have with us and God, being the central force in the lives of our people and the lives of the people. And we'll hear those themes on full display. It's a privilege to be able to welcome up our student rabbi, Andrew Mandel, for the Aliyah, and wonderful to have you with us again this morning.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Va'ed.
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato Baruch ata Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Uvikashtem misham et Adonai Elohecha umatzata ki tidrishenu b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha batzalecha umsaucha kol hadvarim ha'ele be'acharit hayamim ושבת עד אדוני אלוהיך ושמעת בקולו כי אל רחום אדוני אלוהיך לא ירפך ולא ישחיתך ולא ישכח את ברית אבותיך אשר נשבע להם.
Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet v'chaye olam nata betochenu Baruch ata Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
With the Torah in our midst, we take time to think of those in our community in need of healing. Rabbi Rosenthal did a very good job explaining the nuances of the Hebrew grammar in the beginning of the Haftorah this week. When we say comfort, it's not just comfort. The phrase she used was an idiomatic one from the South. Comfort you all. The idea was that, it's not ambivalent in the Hebrew who's doing the comforting. It's a group of people who are meant to be comforting. And so we think of ourselves as agents of that comfort, able to provide it. And we know this is especially true of those in our circles of concern who are in need of healing, who are aching and ailing, that we can be agents of that comfort, and we're actually commanded to do that. So we in our community are thinking specifically of these individuals: Kathy Barron, Simcha ben Sarah, Linda Blum, Donald Brief, Jerry Calderon, Lou Chen, Arden Donahue, Corey Flaum, Jerry Friedman, Susan Friedman, Ashley Goodman, Zellick Gresser, Howard Hochberg, Billy Innerfield, Alexandra James and the James family, Walter Cass, Deborah Jacobson, Ephraim Ben Levy, Erwin Merkatz, Joan Mutun, Natanya Batsara, Sandy Schupper, Bill Smith, Nathaniel Wiesel, and Pam Young. And we'd invite you to share the names of those in your circles of concern, either aloud or in your hearts, those present, if you're joining us virtually, to do so where you are. May they know comfort. May we be the source of that comfort.
Nachamu, nachamu, ami yom Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu, ami yom Elohechem. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, nachamu, ami yom Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu, ami yom Elohechem.
HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Alehem, Nahachilam, Urapotam, Nahazikam, Yishlach Lahem Mehera Refuah Shlema Min Hashemayim, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, Hashta Ba'agala Vizman Kariv, B'nomar, Amen. May the Holy One have mercy upon them. May they know a full and speedy healing of body, mind, and spirit. Amen.
Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, nachamu, ami yom Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu, ami yom Elohechem.
As we prepare to lift and dress the Torah, I'll invite you to please rise.
V'zota Torah asher sa Moshe livnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai v'yad Moshe. Yala la 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 la, la 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 la, yala la la la.
Please be seated. So this is the time if you want to put your siddur to the side and take out the study sheet, or keep your Siddur in front of you and ignore the study sheet because you're not interested. That's fine too. There's lots of good stuff in there. It's a good alternative activity for those looking for an alternative activity. This is Shabbat Nachamu, as we've been saying so many times. It's one of these Shabbatot that receives its name from the Haftorah that we read, and we've been in a series of them. And this morning, I thought we might take a deep dive into some of the ways that our texts are speaking to one another, and we may not always notice or be aware. But within the texts themselves, there are often passages that are in conversation, are in dialogue. And I want to bring that to the forefront this morning and take a look at the dialogue that our texts are having within themselves and with each other. And in doing that, maybe bring out some greater depth into this Haftorah that we read, and to maybe add some more nuance to the text that we sing so often, but maybe don't often get the opportunity to inspect in sort of the detail that sometimes the tradition demands. And to do that, we're going to look at this piece of Jewish time we're in. There's so many, right? The rhythm of the year is a cycle, and we go through it each and every year, but within that yearly rhythm, there are so many smaller cycles, whether it's the Shalosh Regalim, these 3 pilgrimage festivals that we cycle through. We know, Elul will lead us to the Yomim Neraim, right? Elul will lead us into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that there are ties between the calendar and the natural rhythm of nature within the land of Israel. And right now we're in the midst of another cycle within this cycle, which are these weeks that we spoke about earlier of rebuke, where we read passages specifically of God's disapproval, of God's disappointment in the people. And then that leads us into Tisha B'Av, right? This moment of cataclysmic destruction, this moment where everything changed for our people. And that day itself has so many wider resonances. It's not just the loss of the temples that we remember now. It's all of the pain of Jewish memory. And by having these voices of rebuke on one side, we then counter that or balance that out with these messages of consolation. So we're going to dive into some of this a little bit deeper. Let's start, though, just by reading a selection from this week's Haftorah. Right? It comes from Isaiah chapter 40. I have just the first 5 verses at the top. And let's read it. I have often provided us with the English and the Hebrew. Thank you. Is somebody willing just to read the English? And maybe what we'll do is we'll just try to pass the mic around. And for those who don't want to read, you can just pass on the mic. I know we are missing our friends. The screen is on. I was vamping and trying to stall for time, but even just by invoking you, you appear. This is good. Hello. All right. I don't suppose Laura is often chastising me for calling on people, rather not calling on people, but letting people volunteer. So I'm going to call on Laura if she's willing to. Do you have the text study, Laura, by any chance? You do? Would you be willing to just read the English of Isaiah at the very first passage? Oh, different Laura. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Laura Strauss. My apologies. Laura Strauss, who really is a resident expert in education, is often telling me to do this way. We've never had the technology between us. But would you be able to read the first passage, Laura? All right, would you unmute?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, so the messaging usually was.
Comfort, oh comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and declare to her that her term of service is over, that her iniquity is expiated, for she has received at the hand of Adonai double for all her sins. A voice rings out, clear in the desert, a road for Adonai, level in the wilderness, a highway for our God. Let every valley be raised, every hill and mount made low. Let the rugged ground become level, and the ridges become a plain. The presence of Adonai shall appear, and all flesh, as one, shall behold, for Adonai has spoken.
Thank you, Laura. So this is maybe, maybe it seems like an obvious question, but we have a very, very large Bible. The Tanakh is pretty wide. Why should this be the text that we read after Tisha B'Av? There's a lot of options for the ancient sages. Why might this one be chosen? Go ahead, Eric. I'm going to give you the microphone.
I'm sorry. I visualize that they're building a new building for our people. When they level the ground, they can do construction of a new society.
So I think that's certainly part of the hope, right? If we're using the construction metaphor, right? The building has been raised to the ground, even the very foundations, and we're talking about the temple probably, but it's not just the temple as you aptly say it's about society as a whole, right? So we're trying to build something new, and yeah, Cynthia. Cynthia, you're still muted.
I love this beautiful description of smoothing the path forward for us. And I really see it as picking our hearts back up off the ground and entering into Elul and being told you're going to be comforted, the path's going to be made smooth so you can start to rebuild yourselves and get ready for the high holidays and for being able to have the strength and everything you need to go into a period of forgiveness and looking forward to the new year.
Thank you, Cynthia. So yeah, we should remember that it's always a little tricky. We're talking about many, many different things. There's layers of meaning in these texts, why they're chosen. On the one hand, there's a road that's being made smooth. A smooth road is easy to walk through, right? It is taking obstacles out of our path. Now, who might be traversing that road? On the one hand, Cynthia suggests, right, there's a level of this that's maybe a spiritual dimension. Maybe it's us as we're preparing to return, right? We're supposed to be returning during this time, making, to God as we prepare, eventually getting ready to enter Elul and enter into these high holidays when we're making a spiritual return. And we've just had all these messages of rebuke, telling us of all of the things that have been going wrong in the ancient society, and maybe in our society too, and we're meant to be making a return. But I'm guessing Isaiah 41 through 5 wasn't envisioning me necessarily, so who might the text be talking about? Phyllis?
I think that is your first question, why after Tisha B'Av, that it was all about tragedy. But I think what it's saying to us is now it's time to stop wallowing in the past and to look to the future. Comfort us, and then keep going.
Okay, go ahead. This is easy when people are proximate.
I think what really struck me in reading this is this message from God that the inequity is expiated, that it's debt paid. You know, the worst thing about going through a terrible time is if you feel somehow it's meaningless, is what was all that about? And then it feels you don't have any faith or trust in God or the future. And to say that that was all meaningful, it doubly paid your debt, and that's why the path is clear.
So there was some purpose, some meaning behind it. It wasn't just a meaningless experience, that we can actually wrestle some meaning out of this experience. Who is the text probably directly talking to when it was being written? Daron. You have to unmute Daron.
Okay, now you can hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Well, we have to look at the time when Isaiah was written. We don't know the exact time, but it was written in the 7th or 8th century BCE. And
We've lost you, Daron. You've muted yourself, but it looks like you're saying such wonderful things. There you go. Nope. This is sometimes how I feel my conversation with God works. It's like, you're muted. You're still muted, okay. Daron. There you go.
How about now? Okay, I won't touch the screen anymore. Okay, so we have to look at it gets complicated, I think, when you look at the time when Isaiah was presumably written, which would be the 7th or 8th century BCE. So this was written a good 100 years before the destruction of the first temple. So at that time, the great tragedy that Isaiah and his generation would have thought of would be the exile of the 10 tribes, which had taken place 720 or 730 BCE. And so those are tribes that presumably never came back, and yet he is expressing a form of hope that that will happen. And I think what makes it more complicated is that the rabbis who chose when to put various haftarot into our service made that decision many centuries later when they already knew what had happened after Isaiah's prediction. So here we have a prophet who is predicting in the 600s BC or 700s BCE of how God will make things better, we'll say. And yet, within 100 years after that prediction, the first temple was destroyed, which we consider our greatest tragedy. And then we had, after 70 years, some of the people coming back from Persia, and within the next 400 years, building the second temple. And then in the year 70, the destruction of that temple. And if the choice of when to put these haftarot was made in the Talmudic period, I'm not quite sure when it was, we really have to think, what were the rabbis thinking? They already knew what happened in the 400 years after, or 500 years after his prophecy, which was that Israel and the Jewish people faced two extraordinary disasters. And at the time they were making this choice, there was no third temple being built. It was just an exile. So maybe this is just a way of emphasizing eternal hope, because certainly the history that they were aware of would not have given them much reason for hope.
Thank you, Daron. A lot of that historical context is really important as we look at these texts, right? Now, Isaiah is a tricky one because Isaiah is a very long book, a very long prophetic book, and we don't think it was actually written all at one time by one single voice. Scholars now debate whether there were 2 or 3 different voices in this book, but you'll notice, let's take a look at the chart. I know everyone loves charts. I love charts. I'm a very visual person. Everything's so neat and tidy. Anybody see any patterns when you look at the chart? Any patterns emerge? You can just shout them out and I'll repeat them for the folks who can't hear you. All of the Haftarot of Consolation are late Isaiah. This is a very, very, very important thing to notice. What's the earliest Isaiah we have here on the Haftarot of Consolation? 40 onward. 40 is, again, if you take a look, what we are reading this morning. All right, any other things that just jump out at you? Yes, Arden. Thank you. So these Haftarot of Consolation start with 40, they end with 61, so there is some progression through this later part of Isaiah, though not 100% in order, right? There's picking and choosing going on here too. It's not as though the ancient sages were just like, well, start at 40 and move through. There's some very clear selecting going on. Anything about the Haftarot of Rebuke that people notice? All right, so we have in week 3 early Isaiah, very early Isaiah, the earliest Isaiah. And who else? Jeremiah. Who's Jeremiah other than a bullfrog? I've never gotten so much laughter with that one. Thank you. Who's Jeremiah? Anybody know anything about Jeremiah? Nah, that's okay. I said this wasn't a pop quiz. Jeremiah is another prophet, another one of the very long prophetic books. Jeremiah is speaking prophecies, or the book is speaking prophecies to the people before the destruction, and then goes into exile with the people. So there are a lot of different tones to Jeremiah. Jeremiah is sometimes very angry. The people aren't listening to him and God. And he's providing warning of what's going to happen should they continue on their path, should they continue to do the things that create the society that is so corrupt, God doesn't wish to see it continue. There's also incredible consolation and hope in Jeremiah, but those aren't necessarily what we get in the Haftarot of rebuke. Now, yes, Eric? I don't know anything about Leonard Bernstein's Jeremiah Symphony, but I'll have to check it out. Jeremiah becomes a very popular prophet because of the very visual imagery that he uses throughout his books and because of how evocative the language is. Now, let's talk about Second Isaiah, which is the general term for the voice of the prophet Isaiah from chapter 40 onward. Now, you might also hear people talk about Third Isaiah. For the sake of simplicity, let's just talk about Second Isaiah. Having 2 Isaiahs is confusing enough. We'll just have 2. Second Isaiah, we believe, lived at a different time than First Isaiah. First Isaiah, probably very much exactly as Doron described. Second Isaiah, we believe, though, wasn't writing at that time, was probably writing at the 6th century in Babylon with the community that had been exiled. And Second Isaiah is seeing those Persians come and getting ready to see them take over from the empire that they are living under in exile, and anticipating that Cyrus, this king in Persia, is going to let them return and rebuild. So Jeremiah and First Isaiah are living during times when they are anticipating or living through destruction. Second Isaiah is living through and writing about a time anticipating return and rebuilding. So we can see why these would end up on opposite ends of Tisha B'Av. And so what we have here this week is the very first Haftarah of consolation, these very first opening words of Isaiah 2. These are the first words Isaiah 2 speaks to the people. Now, why Nachamu, Nachamu? It's unusual for words to be repeated in Scripture. That means we should be paying really close attention. It means it's really important, like Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. You don't tend to have the words next to each other repeating very much, but when you do, you're supposed to really pay attention. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. So let's look, because there are some ways that these texts are talking to each other. Let's flip the page. Let's get a little bit more acquainted with the texts of the destruction, right? There were a lot of voices that are captured that recount the destruction of the temple. I'm talking about the first temple now, not the second temple. So we're going to read some passages from Jeremiah and some passages from Eicha. Sometimes we call it Lamentations. Eicha is the main book we read on Tisha B'Av because it's the main scroll, the main book of the Tanakh, of the Bible, that recounts the destruction. And let's see if we can tune into why Nachamu might be a very apt counterpoint. Now, I just would love to get some volunteers to read some of these texts. And Laura just read, and next to Laura is Ed on my screen. And I don't know if Ed would be willing to read Jeremiah 31:15 through 21-ish. Maybe? So don't forget, if you're able to, Ed, to unmute when the time comes. Uh-oh. You can't. That's okay.
Now I can.
Thank you, Ed.
I needed help from on high. Thus said Adonai, a voice is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. Thus said Adonai, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, for there is a reward for your labor, declares Adonai. You shall return from the enemy's land. Erect markers, set up signposts, keep in mind the highway, the road that you traveled. Return, maiden Israel, return to these towns of yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Ed. Can somebody tell me the actions that are happening in this text? I want verbs. What are the verbs that are happening in this text? There's weeping, there's wailing. There are tears being shed.
But there's also comforting. I do see that, right?
Say that again.
There is also comforting.
Is there comforting?
It seems like it. There are things that are suggested that will make time will be better. Things will be better.
So there is some suggestion that there will be a better time. Are the people who are being told that willing to accept that comfort? No, right? Rachel, who is an allusion to our matriarch Rachel. Rachel, clearly was not living during this time, right? We have in the Torah an account of her death. So she must be a symbol. What might she be a symbol for? The people, maybe the land, maybe both, right? Her children are gone. And she is refusing to be comforted as she is weeping. At the very end, in verses 21, there are actions going on there that are important. What are they? Eric?
It's like a mapping.
Yes.
It's like they went from, Abraham went from this thing to there, and also the spies did this and the spies did that, and all that jazz.
So there is a mapping going on, as you said, right? As you are being led into exile, mark the way. Mark the way. Why? So when you come back, you know the way. All right. So we have a lot of crying. We have Rachel refusing to be comforted. Ana lehinachem. Right? Lehinachem is the very same Hebrew root as nachamu. Lehinachem, nachamu. You have those similar sounds, that same root in Hebrew. Rachel refuses to be comforted. We, in the very first reading of Isaiah, are being commanded to provide comfort. But for now, there's really only tears. But we have a reference to Silah and Derech, highways and roads, two synonyms that mean the same thing. Let's go back to our quote from Isaiah. What do we have there? Roads and highways. And what's happening in these roads and highways? They're being flattened. They're being made, the path is being made easy. And we asked for whom? For the people who are coming back. Isaiah, too, is anticipating this return and saying, Rachel refused to be comforted. We're going to comfort her. You left along a hard road. We'll make it straight. We'll make it easy as you come back. These texts are in conversation. Second Isaiah seems to have known the words of Jeremiah and is responding. And not just Jeremiah. Let's see if we can read a little bit from Eicha, from Lamentations. These are all passages from the first chapter. Jerry, you are next in line on my screen. I don't know if you're willing to read. If you are, you can give me a thumbs up. I'm getting that's even better. A head shake, no. Laura, are you willing? All right. So we'll give Laura the ability to unmute. And this is Laura B. I need to be very, very precise.
Unmute. Okay. Alas.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay. Alas, lonely sits the city, once great with people. She that was great among nations is become like a widow. The princess among states is become a thrall. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is no one to comfort her. Of all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes.
Would you be willing to read the next one too?
Sure. For these things do I weep. My eyes flow with tears. Far from me is any comforter who might revive my spirit. My children are forlorn, for the foe has prevailed. Zion spreads out her hands. She has no one to comfort her.
You start to see the patterns that emerge. Different voices and different subjects. In Eicha 1, who is the subject that is weeping without restraint, with none to comfort her? Jerusalem, the city itself.
Okay.
Similar to Rachel, who was a symbol, the city becomes a symbol. And who is weeping in the next passage? Who's weeping in the next passage? Zion is weeping. Who else? This is maybe deceptively easy. For these things do I weep. We are weeping. Of course, whoever's writing Eicha is writing that, but we read it communally as a congregation, right? We are weeping. We are weeping, and there is no one to comfort me. Far from me, rachak mimeni minachem, right? Every time you see a yellow highlight on this page, that is a direct linguistic connection to nachamu. It is the opposite, though, right? Ein la minachem. There is no one to comfort. Rachak mimeni minachem. Far from me is a comforter. And at the very outset of Isaiah 2, nachamu, nachamu ami. Right? We've just walked through a day saying over and over and over again, we are weeping, we are beyond consolation, and even more to the core, there are no friends near us. There is no one near us who would provide comfort. No one is willing to approach us with any comfort. We are so anguished in pain, we can't even be comforted should someone appear, though they're not. And then the first words of relief: provide comfort. It's time for comfort. We will be returning. The roads will be made easier. Go to those who are in pain and comfort them. So these are the ways that these texts are in dialogue. Direct dialogue, right? And to sing Nachamu is to have in mind all of this at once. Right? That it's not just that there is comfort, but there is comfort after this experience. And it's an experience that humans walk through in life. Maybe not as keenly as the destruction of a city and the exile that these people experience, but people experience, unfortunately, as we know, times in their life when they feel they have been abandoned. They're going through something that maybe they feel no one can understand, no one can provide comfort to them, or they're going through something keenly and nobody's seeing it to provide comfort. And like I think Cynthia said, it's one thing to understand the historical context, but as Daron mentioned, We don't necessarily read these only for the historical context. Rabbis were putting these calendars of readings together after they knew the history that unfolds, and as Doron said, maybe it's a message of audacious hope. Where are we supposed to identify in these stories and in these texts, and what are they supposed to obligate us or command us to do? So we can put ourselves in the mindset of those sometimes for whom we are alone and we feel there's no one to comfort us. And maybe that's something we're experiencing. Or maybe we can also put ourselves in direct dialogue with God, who through Isaiah 2, at the beginning of this week's Parsha, says, Nachamu, Nachamu. Right? You just walked through a day of devastation. You know what it's like to walk through that kind of moment, and maybe you've never experienced it before, but you've just walked through Jewish memory so that you can try to anticipate what that might feel like to be alone with no one to comfort you. And now, having experienced that, go out and provide comfort. Go out and provide comfort. And so we ask ourselves on this Shabbat, as we sing for comfort, or we're meant to ask ourselves, who around us is weeping and there is none to comfort them? And we know those people are around us. Nachamu, Nachamu. Go provide comfort, you all. Go provide comfort, you all. Right? And that's the dialogue we're having today. All right. We've got a full week ahead of us when Shabbat ends. Yes, it does definitely. The comment was that it actually speaks quite beautifully to what Rabbi Rosenthal incredibly preached last night in her Devar Torah. And if you didn't hear that Devar Torah, I would urge you when Shabbat ends to seek it out. We'll post it. It was really a remarkable Devar Torah, as hers tend to be. But they are in dialogue, and we did not know, though I do think we, as is not unexpected, the themes of the day are what they are. All right, we are going to, oh, sorry.
I think there's an incredible aptness in we haven't had.
Close to your mouth.
We didn't experience the loss of an exile, but the pandemic is this incredible shared experience with so much loss, and it was a pandemic of isolation. So I think coming together and having each other, both connected through Zoom, but even more especially with each other, it's so apt at this season.
It's our Tanakh, our Bible, is evergreen, and different texts impact us differently when we walk through different life events. And I think, one of the reasons I especially wanted to highlight these themes, and I think it's important, is because I think these are texts that might resonate with us coming through as we walk through this pandemic. Would you be willing to read actually just the Walter Brueggemann at the very end? I was going to skip this for time, but what you said, maybe this is a good place to end. This is a professor, not a Jewish professor, but a real scholar of the prophetic texts, but of the Bible in its entirety.
Jeremiah and 2nd Isaiah together, poets of pathos and amazement, speak in laments and doxologies.
Doxologies is a fancy term for praise language.
They cannot be torn from each other. Reading Jeremiah alone leaves faith in death, where God will finally not stay. And reading 2nd Isaiah alone leads us to imagine that we may receive comfort without tears and tearing. Clearly, only those who anguish will sing new songs. Without anguish, the new song is likely to be strident and just more royal fakery. Ooh.
So, it's, as we seek comfort, important to remember where we're walking through. And if we walk through the Jewish calendar, it's impossible not to. All right, we are going to continue with V'hashivota.
Actually,
No.
as I was in pursuit of the handheld mic, I met two lovely members of our congregation today, Stephen Dan and his son Grayson. They informed me that they were blessed with a beautiful baby boy on Wednesday. So I feel like a Shehechianu is in order. So why don't we rise, and may God bless and keep your baby and your family.
Mazal Tov.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'hegianu lezman hazeh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'hegianu lezman hazeh. Continue now with V'hashevota. V'hashevota el levavecha ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim V'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yiheh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Our service always contains a moment of memory and memorial when we remember dear ones who died at this season or in years past. We are remembering these loved ones for whom we are marking Shloshim. Chris Amsel, father of Josh, John Blauner, father of Michael, Wendy, and Andrew, Tamara Renee Watson, mother of Robert, Erwin Diamond, father of Lynn, Michelle, and Sue Ann, S. Jeffrey Garfield, father of Max, Elvira Gallus, mother of Denise and Jan, Nan Leader, mother of Cynthia, Douglas, Jane, and William, grandmother of David, Miriam Lagano, mother of Joan, Mervyn Silverberg, father of Shawnee, Lori, Robin, Yael, and Jordana, Robert A. Skittol, brother of Penny, Ann Yerman, wife of Frederick and mother of Emily and Deborah. We'd invite you to add the names of those that you're remembering, whether you're observing Yahrzeit or maybe Shloshim or Shiva or Shana. You can share the names aloud with us now. And if you're with us on Zoom and you want to add a name, we'd invite you to share it too. Zichronam livracha. May their memories all be for a blessing as we recite the words on page 294 together, Kaddish Yatom on 294. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'almad yivrach yirteh ve'amlich malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha berichu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen.
Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru. Amen. And we conclude our service with the words of Hine Matov, because it's just so great to be all together as a community, singing and praying this morning. Please join me. Hine Matov, umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov, umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. How good it is,
How good it is,
how sweet it is,
how sweet it is
to be together on this day. How good it is,
how good it is,
how sweet it is,
how sweet it is
to be together on this day. Hinei matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hinei matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.